My sister-in-law, Becca, loved to say, there are no boundaries in sisterhood. So I started treating her house like my own personal storage unit. And 3 weeks later, she called the cops on her own family. My husband, Steve, and I moved to the same suburb as Becca about 2 years ago. She had this infuriating habit of borrowing things from my house when I wasn't looking. A sunglass, an expensive bottle of perfume. Whenever I caught her, she'd do this little laugh and say, oh please, there are no boundaries in sisterhood. What's mine is yours, babe. Then my late dad's vintage Polaroid camera disappeared. It was my most prized possession. I tore the house apart. When I asked Becca, she rolled her eyes. Honey, if you can't keep track of your own things, that's on you. A month ago at a Sunday brunch, Becca made a huge spectacle of handing me the keypad code to her garage. My house is your house, she announced to the table. Sisters don't need invitations. The very next Tuesday, Becca walked into my home office unannounced, grabbed my expensive noise-canceling headphones and said, borrowing these? I stared at her, nodded slowly and said, you're right. On Wednesday, I drove to her house on my lunch break, punched in the code, and walked right into her living room. She jumped off her Peloton, completely horrified. What are you doing here? Just grabbing a coffee, I said. I made a latte, drank it on her couch, and left. I did it again on Thursday. By Friday, she was texting me to stay away. By Sunday, she had completely changed her security code. Becca, the queen of the open door policy, had locked me out. I waited until the big day barbecue at our in-laws' house. When I walked onto the patio, Becca was already there, fake crying to Steve's mom, claiming I was stalking her. She just walks into my house, Becca sobbed, dabbing her eyes. I don't feel safe. I walked right up to the table. The whole patio went dead silent. But Becca, I said, projecting my voice so all 20 guests could hear, what's yours is mine, right? No boundaries in sisterhood. Becca slammed her hands on the table, her face turning beet red. You are psychotic, she screamed. You are invading my private sanctuary. Oh, I said, tilting my head. You mean the sanctuary where you're hiding my dead dad's Polaroid camera? The color instantly drained from her face. She looked at Steve, who was staring at her with pure disgust. She's lying, Becca shrieked. She violently grabbed her purse, knocking over a pitcher of lemonade, and sprinted toward her SUV. I'm leaving. I'm calling the police. Steve was faster. He stepped right in front of her car door, crossing his arms. Give me your house keys, Becca, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Right now. No, she wailed, literally stomping her foot. You have no right. Steve didn't argue. He just pulled out the spare emergency key his parents kept, held it up, and walked to his truck. The entire family drove to her house like a funeral procession. When we walked inside, Becca sprinted ahead of us, throwing her entire body against the door of her guest bedroom. She spread her arms wide, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. Don't go in there, she begged. Please, it's just my aesthetic. Steve didn't say a word. He gently grabbed her by the shoulders, moved her out of the way, and opened the door. There it was, set up like a creepy museum display. My dad's camera, my perfume, my sunglass, and half a dozen things Steve's mom had been missing for months. Becca dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. I walked past her, picked up the camera. I looked down at her on the floor. You're right, I whispered. No boundaries. I stepped over her, walked out the front door, and didn't look back, and left her to explain her aesthetic to the rest of the family.